This is Dr. Lurie. I'm the author of Psyche-Politics, How to Read the Political Mind. Psyche-Politics looks at politics from a completely different, unique perspective. Today's talk is going to be on managing fear in our own lives, which will be much more recognizable to us, and managing fear in terms of politics. It all starts with a diagram that I found out about in my last year of residency training. I loved it so much that I was angry. I didn't know about it in my first year. This is because it explains so much of life and so much of what we do in psychiatry and other facets of life without really realizing it. So let's get going. In life, there's unavoidable stress. Now, this might be relatively minor stress, such as coming late for a meeting, or it might be something more serious, such as loss of a spouse. In the political world, it might be loss of an election, or the near loss of an election, or negative polls. In any case, stress causes anxiety. Now, the thing about anxiety is that it's one word that has so many shadings in our vocabulary that people don't understand it, and they get confused by it. Here are some examples of what I mean by anxiety as a single term to explain these feelings as well as many others: uncomfortable, uneasy, worried, nervous, afraid, panicked, and then there's so many shadings. But it's even more complicated because anxiety can not only be conscious, it can be unconscious. That is, we really don't feel it. We're unaware that we're feeling anxious. In fact, it's only known that we're feeling anxious, both to others and ourselves, when our behavior indicates we must have been feeling anxious. And unconsciously, we can feel uncomfortable, uneasy, worried, nervous, afraid, panicked, etc., etc. When there is anxiety, which feels bad, as you can tell by what's in these boxes, there's a need for coping. We have to cope with this bad feeling, or else we can't go on. Now, there is adaptive coping, and let's take an example of that. If a student has an upcoming exam, that would be stress. The anxiety would be the way you feel when you don't know what you're going to say on the exam. However, adaptive coping would include studying. And when one copes adaptively, one grows. One graduates from school, one is able to earn a better living and take his or her place in society. Most of the time, the stress we have causes just a little bit of anxiety, and we cope in a way that doesn't really affect us, it just helps us get by. This is called However, there are times when we cope maladaptively. Maladaptive coping worsens the situation. Here's an example. Some people cope with a feeling of nervousness or uncomfortableness by using alcohol. But alcohol affects our brain, which is what controls our coping. And so we have more coping to do, not less. Another example of maladaptive coping occurs in the case of the widow who's recently lost her husband. Everywhere she goes in the house, she's reminded of him and she feels terrible. So she moves. She moves to another state, a state where she doesn't have a social network, a doctor, a bakery, a supermarket, friends, etc. This is a so-called geographical cure, and it's so-called because it hardly ever works, mainly because we take ourselves with us. So this would be the geographic cure, and what it does is it causes more stress, and it worsens the cycle. Keeping this framework in mind, you can understand a lot of what goes on in your lives, and a lot of what goes on in politics, as we'll soon see.